to buy yours.
Welcome back. You're watching Showdown. Let me start by introducing the panel. Joining me here in the Sky News studio on the far end from me, from the Centre for Independent Studies, Simon Cowan. Welcome to the program. And from PolitiFact Australia, Michael Koziol, making his debut here with me, at least, on Showdown. Welcome to the program as well.
Thanks, Ben.
And let me bring in now who I intend to talk to first up. Joining us from Canberra, the Labor Party's member for Wakefield, which is, of course, Nick Champion, and the member for Casey for the Liberal Party, Tony Smith. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. I want to get stuck into the pomp and ceremony of today. I got the impression, Tony Smith, that Bronwyn Bishop really wasn't up for it. She doesn't strike me as the kind of person that gets into that thing. Do you think she'll be a low-key speaker now that she's in the role?
I think she'll be a great speaker.
A low-key speaker?
I think she will do a fantastic job. I mean, I've known Bronwyn a long time. She is easily the most qualified on our side to be Speaker. She's incredibly experienced, and I think she already, just in her first few hours in the job, demonstrated that. Peter, I think in a few weeks' time, members of the Labor Party even will be saying Bronwyn Bishop's turned out to be a very good Speaker. I know that my friend and colleague sitting next to me here might find that difficult to fathom, but I'm sure that just in a few short weeks by Christmas, they'll see that
as good as Peter Slipper was as a speaker, because despite everything else in the mix, he was regarded as a very good speaker. Do you think that Bronwyn Bishop can live up to that?
Peter, I think she will be one of the great speakers, and he hadn't come to mind, actually, when I was thinking about that. He hadn't. That wasn't the first thing on my mind.
Well, let me ask you, Nick Champion, did the Australian people dodge a bullet, Tony Abbott deciding to make her speaker rather than a minister?
Well, look, I get on pretty well with the Speaker, but she has been a very partisan figure, and perhaps a more partisan role would have suited her. But look, the test for speakers is can they transcend partisan and party lines when they're in the chair, and I guess that the proof will be in the pudding for the new Speaker.
Well, let's get a bit of prejudgment going. What do you reckon? Do you think she will?
Well, I hope she will, you know, you hope and wish that she will, but you know, I guess we'll hold our breath and cross our fingers.
Tony Smith, what about the parliamentary procedures? Now, some meat will be put on the bones of what is happening in that space tomorrow by Christopher Pyne, the new manager of government business. But my suspicion is that a lot of what was instituted during the period of the minority government will go. To what extent that is the case, we don't know. But what would you like to see? Would you like to see, for example, supplementary questions stay? Would you like to see time limits continue in terms of answers that can be given to Dorothy Dix's from the side of the government? What's your view on this issue?
Look, I've been in the Parliament, now for 12 years, and I've seen the Parliament operate well, and I've seen it operate not so well. I think the most important thing is how the Parliament conducts itself. The standing orders get a lot of attention, but really it's how members themselves, obviously in question time, which is the focal point of the day. Now, we'll see what Christopher unveils tomorrow. I'm not privy to it, but put it this way, on length of answers, some of the best answers I've seen in Parliament were short answers before there was a time restriction. And sometimes even with a time restriction, the answer was too long for the question. You watch Parliament yourself. So whilst there's a lot of focus on the rules of racing, if you will, I think the most important thing for this new Parliament is how members themselves conduct themselves. The last Parliament was crash and bash.
But that was mostly from your side of politics, in fairness.
Well, no, I don't accept that. I mean, I think, you had two things going on. You had certainly very robust exchanges based on policy, because Labor broke their promise on the carbon tax. And then you had the other practical thing, which is the tension that arises in a hung parliament. And look, academics tend to be very interested in hung parliaments, but I think that there's a reason why after there's been one, the public tend not to go back to one for about 30 or 40 years.
Nick Champion, from Labor's perspective, it certainly isn't a hung parliament anymore. You guys were comprehensively smashed at the election, and as a result now you're a bit of a rabble in terms of what's left. What does that mean for how you approach the parliamentary process from here? Do you give back to Tony Abbott what he did to you, or do you look at the numbers and the reality of his control of the lower house and focus instead on the Senate and what you can perhaps do there, and just take a strategically different approach to the House? What's the take from your perspective?
Well, I think you're being a bit uncharitable describing us as a rabble, Peter.
Well, you're down to 55 odd seats or thereabouts.
I think in Parliament it's not always just your numbers. If you know, although that's nice to be closer to the government. What is important is unity, which we've had certainly as a result of our new and improved leadership arrangements. And we've had a very united team on policy. So there's been a good feel amongst the caucus members, and I think we're looking forward to a parliament that contests ideas and policy, but I guess has a little less of the personal vitriol and the sort of you know, the feeling that prime ministers were being hunted, or ministers were being hunted, or individual members were being targeted. I think the public want less of that. And I think, you know, Christopher Pyne and the Liberals want to be a bit careful about changing the arrangements we had with the, you know, in the last Parliament.
But they're going to do that, let's be honest, they're going to do that.
Well, it's a question of how much they do it, and I personally think that we should be looking to our friends in Westminster. When they have Prime Minister's questions, they're a lot quicker, it's a lot sharper, and because you've got less time, people tend to be a lot wittier and it's a lot more entertaining. I think you know, the one thing
the other thing, Nick Champion, though, the other thing that happens in Britain, though, Nick Champion, in terms of each of what you say there, is that people from their own side hold their own politicians on the front bench to account in a way that we don't see as much in the partisan contest here. So in the spirit of the Westminster system, I ask you, what that your side will be doing, do you have an issue with in the next 4 weeks of parliamentary sittings?
Well, it's always good to make headlines on your program, Peter. But I think I might let that one go through the.
Peter's here to help.
But look, I do think there is an extraordinary level of party discipline in this country on both sides of Parliament, and sometimes that's a good thing on big issues. That's necessary, but I think there are issues where, frankly, we could allow more conscience votes, a three-line whip system, those sorts of arrangements which give individual parliamentarians a bit more freedom in terms of the party discipline. And I think if that can only really happen if both sides do it, if a culture of it develops.
Well, Tony Smith, we're going to have that culture here on Showdown. What's your reaction?
Yeah, look, I was just going to add a couple of things. I mean, sure, there are some admirable things about Westminster, but I wouldn't get too hung up on Westminster. I mean, they have Prime Minister's question time once a week, unless they've changed it. That's their tradition. Our tradition actually is the most accountable of any of the comparable countries, where the Prime Minister is asked questions every single day. No matter what the issue is, the Prime Minister is there every 24 hours on the dot at 2 o'clock for question time. Now, former Prime Minister Paul Keating took that away for a while. We brought that back when we were last in government. So Westminster is different. You've got 650 members of Parliament. That naturally means they operate a bit differently.
Well, it ends up being a much more robust chamber, doesn't it, Tony Smith? And not everyone gets a seat. Sure, that's the other problem, Nick Champion. You don't want to copy that. They all squeeze in on narrow benches.
Oh, I kind of like that, Peter. I think that adds to the charm and character of the place.
We're getting a little bit more into your personal predilections. Well, what I want to do, though,
just
gentlemen,
very quickly, what Nick could do is allow members of his party to cross the floor. I mean, in the Liberal Party,
that's not going to happen.
Not encouraged,
if it did,
but it is
Tony
allowed.
Smith, if that was to happen, Nick Champion would be crossing the floor on the carbon tax repeal. But that's another matter. I want to play some footage, gentlemen. I just want to play some footage of Tony Abbott. Now, for anyone here on Sky News that actually has a job and was busy working during the day rather than watching what was going on there in Canberra, Tony Abbott had some things to say about how he'd like to see the Parliament run now that he's Prime Minister. Let's take a look.
It should never be a place where motives are impugned or characters assassinated. when any of us are tempted, when any of us
Tony Smith, I mean, you've got to laugh, don't you? Because all the best intentions in the world 5 minutes into his stint in the Parliament as the new Prime Minister can't get away from the fact that if you want to talk about who plays it hard in the chamber, for better or worse, it's Tony Abbott, yet suddenly he wants to take a step back and talk about standards.
Well, I think everyone agreed the last Parliament was crash and bash, and I think that involved senior figures on both sides. I mean, I heard some very strong speeches from Labor ministers and Prime Ministers, Gillard and Rudd. And I think what Tony was saying is this is a new Parliament. The last Parliament was dysfunctional, and the Australian people want to see the Parliament rise to the occasion.
Do you think it's going to rise with Clive Palmer in the mix?
Well, we're a rich and robust democracy, aren't we? And as you look around the chamber on the first day of a Parliament, you have, I think, if you're fair-minded, admiration for everyone that's got elected. It's not easy to get elected to the House of Representatives. But, of course, in that role, you're judged on how you perform. And we'll see how all of the independent minor parties, and for that matter every 150 of us, perform over the coming weeks and months.
All right, let me just bring up my panel in before we go to a commercial break on this. Michael Koziol as well as Simon Cowan from the Centre for Independent Studies. Gentlemen, let's start with Clive Palmer. Simon, let me go to you. He often talks about his tax idea, which is pay people more because then there'll be more money cycling through the economy, which means that there'll be more money to be able to be taxed. I don't quite understand it. It sounds a little reminiscent of what Pauline Hanson used to say. Thoughts?
It's Keynesian economics taking to its an absolute absurd end, which is a massive tax cut, a massive increase in government spending, and that's all going to somehow balance out. As I've said to you in the past, I think there's absolutely no economic sense to that idea whatsoever. I think we've got some serious debates about economic challenges in the country, and proposing schemes way out of left field like that is a waste of everyone's time.
Michael, at PolitiFact, have you guys tested any of Clive Palmer's statements?
We had a look at that one during the campaign, and we found it to be false.
What a shock. What an absolute shock.
I had a quick look at our Clive Palmer Truthometer before coming on, and yeah, he hasn't got a great record on it, I'm afraid, Peter. I think 3 falses, 1 pants on fire, but 1 mostly true. So
what was that?
That was him talking about how Japan had built its economy by processing Australian resources and using Australian resources, and that, he was on the money on that one mostly. But in general, there's a few falses.
Well, I guess a clock
Clive.
is right twice
we'll keep our eye
a day, so you never know. All right, we're going to take a break, gentlemen. When we come back, we're going to move on from the procedures with the return of Parliament to look forward to what might be in the mix tomorrow strategically, but also in terms of policy. You're watching Showdown.
At Coles, we love our fresh Aussie fruit and veg, like these beautiful 100% new season Aussie grown mangoes, grown up north by farmers like Marie.
Aussie grown.
And delicious 100% Aussie grown vine ripened tomatoes, grown by farmers like Chris. Feed your family Coles fresh Aussie fruit and veg, grown on Aussie farms, sold in Aussie stores. Coles and Australian farmers, together we're helping Australia grow.
Can whiter teeth also be healthier teeth? Holly and Kylie took our test. A whitening toothpaste versus new Oral-B Pro Health Whitening. Looking good, ladies. Here's the moment of truth. Both got whiter smiles, but only Kylie's mouth is clinically proven to be protected in all the areas dentists check most. And her smile is up to 96% whiter versus before. Try it for yourself. New Oral-B Pro Health Whitening. P&G.
Free, 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 free.
Right now at Pizza Hut, get free delivery when you order online at pizzahut.com.au.
This isn't just a hospital, because it's much more than just wards, halls, smocks, scrubs and busy people. It's brilliant machines, reaching beyond these walls, connecting doctors to hardware, to software, anywhere. Delivering better patient care wherever those patients are. Because a hospital isn't just in a hospital, it's everywhere.
Slippers, mate. Mate?
No one likes fungal nail infections, but now there's a file-free solution. New Rejuvenail kills the fungus without needing to file your nails first. New Rejuvenail. Do your nails a favour.
Look, every day we're using more and more energy.
The world needs more energy.
Where's it going to come from?
That's why right here in Australia, Chevron is building one of the biggest natural gas projects in the world. Enough power for a city the size of Singapore for 50 years.
What's it going to do to the planet?
Natural gas is the cleanest conventional fuel there is.
We've got to be smart about this.
It's the smart way to go.
What makes the Hyundai i30 Australia's best small car is it the stunning design, the outstanding quality, the advanced features, or the fact that the i30 range starts from an incredible $29.90 drive away, including 6-speed automatic. Tell us what you think about the i30 and you could win one. Who offers you all this plus no deposit and nothing to pay until 2015? We do. Hyundai.
Welcome back. You're watching Showdown, where I'm joined here in the Sky News studio by Michael Koziol as well as Simon Cowan. And we're talking out of Canberra to Labor Party's Nick Champion, and for the Liberal Party, we're talking to Tony Smith. Now, gentlemen, let me come to you about where we go from here in terms of Parliament. Nick, I'm sure that the Labor Party's Tactics Committee ahead of question time has got a seat reserved on it there with your name on it. What are you expecting to be the front line of questioning coming from Bill Shorten and the rest of the front bench tomorrow? Is it asylum seekers? Is it the carbon tax? I doubt that. What else could it be? And equally, what's your expectation in terms of whether Bill Shorten's going to steal the limelight and ask all the questions himself, or is he going to share it around a bit?
Well, look, I don't have a chair at the Tactics Committee, but look, I'm quite sure that Bill will equip himself well. He did that today and showed he was a fine opposition leader and
so
will be a fine Prime Minister.
So you think he's going to improve on his time as a minister then, because he was a terrible parliamentary performer as a minister?
No, Bill was always been great out in the community, and he's always been good in the Parliament. He's been very good, I think, in his stint as a leadership, and he's had plenty of practice because of our leadership debates and the like that went on. So I'm confident that he'll equip himself well, and I'm confident that the team will equip themselves well.
And the issues, what are you expecting?
Well, look, I think there are obviously issues about the Canton hypocrisy that the government has exhibited around the debt ceiling. I think there'll be a pretty forensic examination on border protection, and in particular some of the language that's been used on one very small area, this issue of boats, turning the boats back, which we all know to be relatively unimportant in the grand scheme of things. It's actually offshore processing that really dissuades people from coming here, and that's what we should be seeking out a bipartisan approach on. And it's interesting now that after being in opposition and trashing the Malaysian transfer agreement, we now find out the government seeking similar transfer arrangements with other countries.
Scott Morrison denies it, but Tony Abbott left the door open. He wouldn't answer questions on it.
Well, look, the important thing is I'd support the government seeking those transfer agreements. It would be a sensible thing for them to do so. Don't get hung up on turning the boats back. Be sensible about that. Seek transfer agreements, which was the previous government's approach and what we ended up instituting with Papua New Guinea, which has actually slowed the numbers of boats dramatically.
All right, we're going to get to the policy in a sec, though. We're going to get to the policy. Tony Smith, your reaction. Nick Champion didn't answer it, understandably so. Do you think that Bill Shorten will steal the limelight for himself, or do you think he's more likely to share the questions around tomorrow?
Oh, his instinct will be to steal the limelight, but we'll see what his
surprise, you said that.
See what his Tactics Committee says. Look, tomorrow is Carbon Tax Abolition Day. That is quite rightly the first item on the agenda. It was the critical item in the last federal election, and we have a mandate to abolish the carbon tax.
See, can I ask you a question on that, though, Tony Smith? Because I agree you've got the mandate to abolish it. You won the election if you believe in that sort of mandate theory, as opposed to the check and balance system of the Senate. But you've also got a mandate to put direct action into play, and instead of putting that forward urgently over the next 4 weeks, that's not coming up until next year, and only even then after a green and white paper process. One of your colleagues described direct action to me as a good school project but an embarrassing piece of legislation. Do you have any concurring with that?
Well, I disagree with whoever that person was, and everything we're doing on direct action we're doing in accordance with what we said we'd do before the election. There's been terms of reference out and all the rest. But, I mean, the Labor Party are nothing if not unembarrassable. I mean, on the carbon tax, they will ignore the will of the Australian people. But the question is,
not if Nick Champion had anything to do with it.
That's right, and I think that the Nick Champion view will gain in currency over the coming weeks and months, and Bill Shorten will have to revisit this issue, because whilst he's ignoring the Australian people now, he won't be able to forever. Finally, the penny will drop.
All right, quick question here in the studio to you, Michael, from PolitiFact. Did you guys test the factual basis of direct action's claims in terms of emissions cuts?
Yeah, well, look, we had a look at direct action and emissions trading schemes and a lot during the campaign and before.
Where did it roughly sit?
Look, will it reach the targets? We can't say for sure one way or the other, but most economists, business people, climate analysts don't believe that it will, and don't believe that it's as good in principle.
Well, we've got an economist here in the room. Simon, your thoughts on direct action?
I think direct action is going to end up being another type of corporate welfare scheme where favoured sons of industry come looking for their pet projects that get funded by the government.
All right, there you go, Tony Smith. Now, Simon is no crazy left-winger. I can't necessarily say that about you, Michael. I don't know you well enough to know either way. But certainly Simon isn't. He's from the Centre for Independent Studies, and he thinks direct action is a sham, a joke, a debacle. Your reaction?
Well, he's entitled to his view, but the view of the coalition for the last two elections has been that direct action is a far more sensible way to meet that emissions reduction target of 5%. And we've run to the last two elections on it. It's our policy. I mean, he's very entitled to his view. And I think everyone in the coalition has full confidence in Greg Hunt to ensure that this is delivered effectively, it meets its target, and that it's all of the elements to it are successful.
All right, well, we'll see. It's got an A+ at the moment anyway, as far as school projects go, according to one of your colleagues. But let me ask you, Nick Champion, what would be, let's go into a parallel universe here, what would be your first question tomorrow? Were you the opposition leader and Labor had obviously gotten out of the way on the carbon tax? What would you be doing first up with your first question tomorrow? Were you in Bill Shorten's shoes?
Well, my first question is always going to be about the car industry and always going to be about jobs. And I guess that's coming from a pretty selfish point of view. I represent a manufacturing electorate. I represent a manufacturing state. But look, I do think there is a broader jobs issue out there in the economy. And there is a tremendous structural adjustment going on because our currency is appreciated, because our competitors have depreciated their currencies, and we have the Reserve Bank, I think, trying to, hoping the Australian dollar comes down,
but it's more likely to go fundamentals. Up, isn't it? Realistically, it's more likely to go up than down.
Well, the fear is, I think, that it's taken on something of a favourite son status amongst currency traders. It's become a safe currency for them to invest in, and they're still getting relatively high interest rates in comparison to the rest of the world. So
and that's only likely to increase next year, isn't it? Because the US, through its political problems there in Washington, is going to go through the same problems early next year that it was going through recently this year, and that will continue with standoffs that are debilitating, and that's all pushing the Aussie dollar up.
Yeah, and you've got the Japanese printing yen and lowering their currency. We've got the Europeans not taking very decisive action on their political and economic problems, and so you've got this very big structural change going on in the economy.
But that all adds up to a dead car industry, surely.
Well, it doesn't just cause problems in auto manufacturing. It causes problems in any sort of manufacturing or export industry, in tourism, in farming, food production, and a whole range of areas. And we stand at the moment to have a very big threat against the productive capacity of the country. Some industries can obviously transform themselves. I've seen a lot of wineries now, lifting the quality of their product and the price point of their product, but not everybody can do that. And I know a lot of people who sell hay into China or to Asian markets, they're finding it difficult. It is a very difficult environment, and if my first question would be on that broader issue that Australia faces. We've got to do some things together as a nation to address that. I don't think my solutions would be shared by most of the panel, but
well, let's find that
I
out
think
right
we should
now.
discuss it.
I want to ask Simon Cowan. I've got a sneaking suspicion that not representing an electorate which has a whole bunch of people working for Holden in it, you're not quite so sympathetic to the subsidising of the car industry.
Look, I'm very sympathetic to the workers at Holden. What I am not sympathetic to is the long list of rent seekers coming for taxpayers' dollars to support inefficient industries that are employing a fraction of the workforce. We've got literally more than $1 billion a year that goes into subsidising the car industry that employs 45,000 people. I mean, it is simply not good business sense
well,
for
can
the
I
country.
ask, one of the estimates that I saw, I think from Banks during the weekend, I hope I'm not misquoting him, PolitiFact can check that during the week, but my understanding was that he was saying that it was about $300,000 per job. That is the way Nick championed that these figures appear. Your reaction to that? Because that does not sound sustainable if the figures are right.
Well, I think it depends on, sort of how you add those figures up. If you add them up over 50,000 people, you won't find a figure like that. I suppose if you squeeze it down to the 1,700 at Holden's, then you might be able to get a figure like that. But
Holden did get $2.1 billion.
Well, it's immaterial. I could point to the private health providers who are the recipients of the fastest growing tax concessions to industry. We could point to the diesel fuel rebate, but our friends at the think tanks aren't nearly so keen to get rid of those icons of the Liberal Party agenda. I think we have to have a broad discussion about, because it's not just auto industries, as I've said before, it's our agricultural sector, it's manufacturing out in the bush, in regional centres and the like, it's food processing. This is a broader issue about the structure of the Australian economy caused by currency movements, and it's a new problem. It's something we haven't had before. In fact, in the past, our floating currencies acted exactly as it should, as a shock absorber, but it's not doing that
anymore,
now.
and it's not likely to change. But on a separate issue entirely, before we run out of time in this segment, Tony Smith, I want to come to you on GrainCorp. Now, we saw last week Joe Hockey come out and make it quite clear that he won't be bullied on this, and he was talking to all sides, in a sense. So I'm not asking you to bully the Treasurer, but I am asking for your opinion. Now, do you think that GrainCorp should be sold to this US giant if they want it, which they clearly do?
Oh, well, look, I mean, Joe was making the obvious point that under the FIRB Act, he has to make the decision at law, and only he makes that decision.
But what's your view?
Yeah, no, I'll come to that, and he will analyse all the material before him. I don't have all the material before me, obviously. But Peter, to answer your question, I've followed the debate pretty closely. I think what's been missing from a lot of the dialogue in this debate is really the food task for the world for the next 10, 20, 30 years, and Australia's opportunity to be a big part of that. And it's pretty obvious to do that we're going to need a lot of investment and a lot of access to global supply chains. And foreign investment has always been critically important to our country. I am pro foreign investment, and whilst Joe's got to make the decision, and he'll have all the information before him, I've got no doubt he'll make the decision that's in the national interest. But a lot
Sounds
of the
like
arguments
acknowledging that you're not armed with all the facts, I accept that, but knowing what you do know and following the debate as closely as you say as you have, and obviously in opposition you were the the shadow pal sec for the Treasury. It sounds like what you're saying, though, Tony Smith, is that your initial instinct would be to sell it, to authorise the sale.
Well, look, let me say this, Peter. Let me say two things. I mean, firstly, I haven't been persuaded by any of the arguments against to any great extent. I mean, there's been arguments about competition raised, but the competition regulator
but you acknowledge that rural Liberals as well as the Nats are just going to flip out when this happens, if Joe Hockey does authorise the sale?
Well, no, I don't think that would be a foregone conclusion if he does. But the other point I'd make is that for those who are opposed to it, I mean, I think it is incumbent on them to also say where the alternative capital investment will come from and the access to those global supply chains. So that's how I see the issue. My instincts obviously are more favourable than some of my colleagues. But I haven't seen anything that's really been persuasive in opposition to it at this point.
All right, Nick Champion and Tony Smith, as always, thanks for joining us, particularly being down there in Canberra. We'll let you go and grab yourselves a drink and hold on and buckle up for tomorrow, first day of question time. Thanks for your company.
Thanks, okay, mate. And I'll hope Nick gets the first question, hey?
Well, if he gets the first question, it may not be what Bill Shorten wants on the carbon tax, but we'll leave it there. Nick Champion and Tony Smith, thanks very much for your company. We're going to take a break here on Showdown. When we come back, we'll get the panel's views on what's going to happen in Parliament and particularly in relation to policy development. Back in a moment.